right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Our clock is faster than actual time, so I guess we just need to, I don't know, get going. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming today and flexibility on the dates. I didn't assume you wanted to be here next Monday for Labor Day or Memorial Day. I don't even know what day it is anymore, but I appreciate it. So, we're going to start out with roll call.
Bender. Here. Blair. Absent. Bottles. Absent. Brown. Here. Bryan. Here. Buck. Absent. Clayton. Absent. Dahl. Absent. Doyen. Oh, she's here? Okay.
Okay, since we're recording this, we need to have everything verbal on the record, please, if we could.
Doyen. Here. Furch. Here. Gardner. Absent. Gindelsberger. Here. Gerber. Here. Hope. Here. Horner. Absent. Ikonen. Here. Jenkins. Here. Kelly. Absent. McFarland. Here. McMahon. Absent. Mafuccio. Here. McComber. Absent. Merrill. Morrison. Here. Petzinger. Absent. Pierce. Here. Ritter. Here. Sterling. Here. Wasdall. Absent. York. Absent. Okay. Quorum is present.
Thank you. So it was sent out about 3 weeks ago, and I sent it out 2 weeks ago, and then I sent it out again this morning, the minutes from April 25th. Was there any changes? Anyone wanted to see those minutes that were sent out? Okay. Okay, we're going to jump right into this then. So not going to go over this again. What a recommendation is, skipping right over it. We're going to jump right into it. So today we're going to talk about Chapter 9, Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and then we're going to talk about Chapter 11, Implementation, which are the last two chapters of the plan that we haven't talked about at this point in time. So depending on how long our conversation goes today, we will also have a kind of a brief just overview of how we prepare for the final recommendation meeting, which will be on June 13th here at City Hall. So Chapter 9, Parks, Trails, Park, Recreation, Open Space. So I just wanted to go over a bit of what the existing studies are that the city has conducted and kind of where we're at as we move forward. So in 2005, the city did the Foothills Plan, which really brought in the understanding of the native open space, really in the understanding of connectivity of open space, trying to preserve larger areas that would be joined together to create an open space network. It is also where we did the constraint-based planning. So floodways, habitat, and hillsides are the majority of the backbone of that system in the foothills. In 2012, the city, and that is actually wrong. Oh, I hated when I did that. It should say these dates are reversed. I'm sorry. 2012, we did a parks trail and a parks master plan, and it failed to be adopted. So ignore that date. In 2019, we adopted a trails master plan that focused on the river plain areas and some foothills, but it really was more of a connectivity plan within the interior of the city. So it really talked about how development works and how we work to connect trails through the development process. In 2017, the city had the development impact fee study and capital plan update, but that plan doesn't address the foothills either. So actually, it enforces impact fees for trails and parks within the city, but it didn't have any projects identified north of the Farmers Union Canal. So while we collect impact fees for them and we ensure that they meet our minimum level of service, they are not part of the network of planned improvements for the city as part of that capital plan. So missing and updated information. I think you've heard this theme as we've gone through this process, is that there's a lot of information that needs to be updated. There's a lot of information that just needs to, maybe is missing. So what we have under development right now is we're updating an updated survey of what the city owns and maintains. So we have several places that pieces and parts have been done when we did the Parks Master Plan that never got adopted. there was some information there. Trails, we have some information there, but really haven't tied down to what we own versus what we maintain or have easement to. And so that's really something that we are working on. It's coming forward as part of the capital planning process the city's doing. And trying to get a really good list of that. We use a company called, I'm going to say it wrong, I always want to call them Appraisals Northwest, and they're not Appraisals Northwest, but that's my mind, who actually comes in and inventories. We haven't done that in about 4 years since really we came out of the recession. So it's really important that we come back and start doing that again, really have them go out, appraise, find out the actual value of what we own. And as we look at operation and maintenance costs, that's going to happen. Evaluations Northwest. Thank you. I knew I was wrong. I don't know why evaluation and appraisal don't go in my head. So we'll be looking at new classification in parks for parks and trails. This tied to the type of improvement and who maintains the facility. We began a process to do a parks, trails, and open space master plan. And really what we came across was, again, this obstacle of we don't even know what we have really thoroughly vetted and inventoried, and we really need to do that before we can move forward, because we really need to classify what we own before we go to the next step of how do we expand or where do we do connections to make sure that that happens. Integrate standards to be citywide versus in the city and foothills. As we read through the chapter today, you'll have a lot of information about parks and trails in the flatlands or the river plain, and then you'll have and then there's the foothills, and it was an add-on, because it was drafted as part of the foothills comprehensive plan. We added on the foothills and just really kind of left it as its own entity. So one of the things we know that we need to be doing is really integrating our standards, talking about a citywide network, talking about how trails work together, and really look at options for types of trails and what we anticipate happening and being directed as we move forward. We need to update our impact fee study and capital plan project list. We need to do that about every 7 years regardless. And as you look back there, 2017 was the last time we did it. It is just time to be done. Refresh our level of service standards for trails and for parks, and really look at what does that fee happen, because part of the impact fee is actually what does it take to purchase land or to improve land. And if you guys aren't aware, it's kind of gotten really expensive as of late. So what we're collecting may not actually be accurately covering the cost of improvements for the city. And then finally is look at the alternative funding options. So we have as a city, through the capital process and through our leadership on our council, have really begun developing a kind of a broader discussion about how do we fund these improvements, or how do we fund ongoing operation maintenance? And one of them is the Conservation Education Program, which is really looking at when developers come in and how they are converting land that may be open space or may be agricultural land, and when they convert that land to development, how do we try and seek out, not necessarily a one-for-one, but offsets to improve the environmental landscape of the city? So how do we conserve lands within the city? And so we've looked at that program, which is a transfer fee and a annual addition to the homeowners' fees, which allows the city then to invest back into some of the trails and operation and maintenance of facilities that we have on the city. And then developer requirements. So we use development agreements or the CID fundings. CID is the Community Infrastructure District associated with major planned communities. So Avamore and Spring Valley both have those. And looking at how we use those requirements or those resources to fund a system operation and maintenance. So a good example is Spring Valley. They were given a density bonus for having an ongoing funding source for open space. At this point in time, they are having to fund that themselves because they haven't come up with a different program for that. So they're funding that operation and maintenance directly from their own coffers at this point in time. And then finally, we've also looked at recreation districts. And so what does that look like? They each have their pros and cons. Recreation districts are a separate entity from the city. So if we did create that, the city council and the city itself loses some control and autonomy as to what happens there. But it is a separate ad valorem district. So it's an actual tax collecting district. So they can actually levy fees for the maintenance and operation of open space, which is different from the city because we're not allowed to raise our levy rates that same way. So just to let you know, these are concepts and ideas that the city's working through right now. As I said before, in our current fiscal year, we had a Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan that we are working through, where we're just working in the stages of it, kind of piecing it apart and moving it forward. But I just wanted to let you know, these are the kind of the things that are on development, because I think when you read this chapter, you're going to be like, gosh, you have the river plain, we have the foothills. Why is it so disconnected? Well, we know it's disconnected. We are very much aware of that. And we anticipate that the update to the Trails Open Space Master Plan would be part of this comprehensive planning process. Okay, so general uses in the chapter. So we have some big definitions that we use, and I'm going to direct you to pages 184 to 186. But we have active recreation, which is parks and trails, primarily in the lower city. If you look at maps 9.1 and 9.2, you can see where are those parks at, where are planned parks at, where are planned trails at. And that's really, if you think of active recreation, those are the places that we're actively doing something. We're not going to sit or watch or see a scenic vista. It's where you're actually physically out there doing something. We have open space, which is natural areas and historic landscapes, riparian areas, or active agriculture. And I would direct you back to that natural features chapter 7 that we talked about before, where we had those natural features, hazard areas, and special sites. So again, there's some cross-pollination between these chapters, right? We know that they're going to be identified as special places, but then how do we manage them as open space as well? Floodplain and floodway, two categories that are on our future land use map. So I'm going to have a slide for this in a second, but if you remember, let's see if I pull it up. Where did I put it? Here you go. So if you remember, this light blue is the floodway in our comprehensive plan. So we actually set it aside for no development in this area. So basically, it can be open space within a development. And then as part of the 2017 plan, you can look very closely. There's little green dots, and the little green dot overlay is actually our floodplain overlay, and it's the place that we want to collect open space. And so it's really, again, an attractor. You use the floodway as the attractor, and the floodplain is where we try and collect open space adjacent to it. So those goals are a little bit different as we move forward. And then we have the foothills, which has some unique categories of planning. So if you see map 9.3, we have natural open space, which is habitat, recreation areas. We have developed open space, which is parks and trails. You have potential open space that we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is an area for potential open space preservation or set aside. And then we have trails, which are primary and secondary trailhead, core, and stacked looped trails. So, guiding questions. Does the plan identify the types of parks, trails, and open space that the city should be focusing on? Are the existing, that question's going to come up here. I'm going to jump here in a second. Ignore that second question. I'm going to ask that question later. Are there items and ideas and concepts that are missing when you're talking about parks, trails, and open space in Eagle? Knowing the topography, knowing the city, knowing the values of the community, when we're talking about these types of open space, active recreation, open space, floodways and floodplains, and then foothills, are there types of open space that we're missing that you feel like we need to be focusing on in a different way? Go to your groups, you all have a table pad. You have a number table, put your names on your pads. You have a scribe or a city person that can help you with each note-taking if they want to, or in some people's cases, please don't let Charlie write. He has very bad penmanship. So I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to talk through that. General open space and trail uses, do you feel that we have them recognized, or do you think there's something that we're missing when we're talking about amongst yourselves? I can. There you go.
That's workable. Okay. Because I didn't know it brought in late, so.
We can fix it with the sign-in sheets because they each have their.
Okay, well,
Okay, how are we doing, guys? Okay, we're gonna go on to the next. You guys, this is all gonna merge together, so don't feel like you're gonna lose anything here. So, one of the first categories within the plan was active recreation, and this is really runs it back to the city's historic development of parks and trails, which was really focused on active recreation. So the goals are to create ample areas for diverse indoor and outdoor recreational interests. So if anybody said there's something missing in the plan, it might have been like a rec center, like a big building right over here. It's not the comp plan. Create pathway system that provides connectivity to schools, neighborhood, public buildings, businesses, parks, and special sites. Create and maintain a park and recreation system that encourages citizens to be active regardless of age and ability. So if you remember the level of service statement in the last question, then I said, oh, hang on, I'll talk to you about that. So currently, our current adopted level of service is 3.3 acres for every 1,000 population for parks. The current need based on our current population is 112 acres. Today, we have 122 with 40 additional acres in development. So we're holding pretty good to that based on population. A current LOS for trails, and I'm going to put an asterisk next to this. Trails in the city's capital plan is only green belts. So we only have an adopted level of service for green belt trails. And of that, we're supposed to have just over a half mile of trails per 1,000 people, which means we should have 17.34 miles of trails. And right now, we estimate our trails, greenbelt trails, at 18.2. So again, we have sufficient. But if you think about it, the greenbelt is a limited geography, right? We only have so much mileage that we can get green trails on because the greenbelt trails are on the Boise River, maybe on Dry Creek. So as we go forward, it's really important that we start looking at trails in a little different way, because we are going to run out of real estate to build trails and be able to do use impact fees or development processes for those type of improvements. So really talking as we move forward, the important part will be having a conversation about what trails look like in the future.
Are you adding to that the newly created trails along the canals? Or is that part of the?
Nope. Not today. So, and I do touch on that in a little bit later, which we've just done some work with through our trail superintendent, gotten some agreements with the irrigation companies to run trails along some of the irrigation routes. But according to our current goals and plans, that's not Greenbelt Trail. So the question becomes, do we need to redefine what a trail is, or what a Greenbelt Trail is, or what trails we're going to look for impact fees for? And I think one of the concerns, if you read the capital plan, which it's online, but it was that we didn't have a really good understanding of what we wanted to maintain as trails. And so we were just saying, put a trail in, put a trail in, put a trail in. And really, when we start talking about this, we have to have some understanding of ownership, maintenance, and operation of it. And I think at the time we did that it was just not ripe for a conversation about sophistication of what's happening now with the foothills, with what's happening with the drainage canals. And so I think that's really where you're going to see that.
So the impact fees that currently are based on, for example, trails, what it costs to build a greenbelt trail, for instance.
Correct.
And for parks, it would be any kind of park with light pads.
So yeah, let me explain. So our impact fee is based upon a level of service, like how much would we do? We then have to identify projects that will get constructed. So in our impact fee or our capital plan for parks and trails, there's actually a list of projects and an estimated value of those projects. That's where the number comes from. So it has a sports fields in there. It has Gerber Park was in there at one point in time, but it identifies projects and it says it's going to take this much to buy the land. It's going to take this much to develop it. And these are the types of things that are going to be in that park. So it can be very broad. It can be very, very limited, but it has to be in the impact fee ordinance to collect impact fees for it. And that impact fee is based upon the cost to construct those facilities.
The capital improvement program was originally developed for parks and pathways for impact fees.
Mm-hmm.
Has it progressed and grown to include all those?
No, it was last updated in 2017, and that is one of probably the biggest limitations to the plan is that it does not address any improvements north of the Farmers Union Canal.
We're talking about local service based on population.
Yes.
Quick math in my head says that's about 35,500 in terms of 35,500 people.
Roughly.
What is the population boundary for doing those calculations? City limits
City limits.
Everybody that's inside the donut holes in the city as well.
Just the city limits. It's based on the city's population because it's the only population we have the control over investing and collecting taxes for. So you could have a city that's isolated and has a whole lot of population outside of it. We don't provide parks, trails, and open space for people who are not part of our community. And that's because we can't collect taxes for them, so how do we fund those facilities? You would get out of whack.
We have lots of people that are not seeing residents that are in an Eagle postal address because they're in the rural
Yeah.
annexed areas that are certainly making use of it. I realize we can't do the math.
You know, it's really interesting when you start looking at user numbers for the city system. We got people from Boise using our system. The bike park is a perfect example of that. You can go up there and they're not Eagle residents all using that facility. But similarly, I'll admit, you know, probably I'll go down and use Ann Morrison or Julia Davis Park or go to the zoo. And those are facilities that are provided by Boise City. So it is a balancing act, but according to these numbers and the limits under Idaho code, we calculate based on population of the city and what we actually have the ability to leverage tax collection for.
So in the future, long ago, you gave us a compass map with projected populations, and that was Eagle planning area for that, and if I recall, was that something like 40-some thousand people to be added on by 50?
Somewhere right around there, if the projections are accurate, and certainly we all agree that our projections need to be reviewed, right? So just keep that in mind, a little asterisk up there. But yeah, that's the importance of this level of service, is the need to continue to grow this system in order to collect impact fees. If we don't want to collect impact fees, we don't have to worry about this. It is only based upon if we want to be collecting impact fees from developers to help offset the cost of the system. What are you laughing about? It's true. I don't want to go into that. Judy.
Can you repeat that part that you said, that we're only, accepting, impact fees from development below the Farmers Union Canal?
No, that's not what I said. We are collecting impact fees for any development within the city of Eagle, but all the projects identified in the impact fee study are south of the Farmers Union Canal. There are no projects identified north of the Farmers Union Canal, which, a good example, Terraview Park. So Terraview is going to come in. They're going to build a 17-acre community park similar to Merrill and Gerber. They're going to have all the similar amenities. They can ask for impact fee reimbursement. They can come to the city and say, hey, rather than paying you impact fees, we're just going to build this facility for you. Great. There's great ways to leverage that. It's a great partnership. No one in the foothills can do that, because there are no facilities that they can provide that are in the capital plan to ask for impact fee credit for or reimbursement for. So it is a different, we're going to collect from them, but we have no projects to use to develop up there. So it's not necessarily, I don't want to say it's unfair. I mean, it's fair because it's capital improvement. It just needs to be updated, because we need to recognize that there is a future growth area up there. There are going to be parks and trail needs up there, and thus we should be identifying those as what the priorities are for the city in the long term. Does that make sense?
Just have a question, looking at a map. Looking at a map and understanding that the city doesn't require any developer over, like, RE or anything to have parkland dedicated. The lands are, the properties are large, so would it be appropriate in the map to kind of designate the areas where you would not likely see parks located, or?
I think that's a great statement, but it's not necessarily true, though. You could still choose to build a park in an RE area, in a 2-acre, 5-acre area, because it's a place that maybe in proximity it's a good place for it. It's at a trailhead. It's a good starting point for different activities. What we don't require is when you have 2 acres or more, we don't require parks as part of the subdivision. And the reason we don't do that is because we assume that by the time you get to a 2-acre or a 5-acre lot, you've created yourself enough place to recreate on your own property. So you're not seeing, you're not seeing pocket parks or those type of things being done there. But it wouldn't necessarily mean that we don't want a park in those areas. It just means that we're not going to require a subdivision to put a park in those areas. Does that make sense? Okay, so you have pages 186 to 189. We want you to look at this. These are active recreation goals. Do you think the current level of services that are here are appropriate? Do you think there's things we need to consider differently? We could differentiate parks. We could differentiate, community parks versus regional parks. We could differentiate greenbelt trails. You could do foothills trails. Those core trails, stacked loop trails, all of those could be done as part of that. Do you think this level of service is efficient, or do you think there's more that needs to be considered? And recognize that that would then be mirrored into your impact fee processes. Okay, I'm going to give you another, this is not too complex, so 5 minutes-ish to talk amongst yourselves and not drop down. are talky. This is a very hot topic. So we're going to go on to the next section just so we can keep going. So you can ask a question.
In pathways section, is somewhere described the parameters of the pathway? So sidewalks along streets wouldn't necessarily be considered pathways.
Sidewalks can be used as pathway connections, but they are not in their own right a pathway.
But all the pathways through Lexington Hills, for example, would be pathways.
No, they are not, because those are private pathways and they are not open to the public. So that's part of our mapping problems we have going on, guys. That's part of our inventory issue. Okay, so
Can you say the pathways are walkable or accessible and sidewalks are walkable? There's difference in the use of them. A lot of times they're not.
a best way to describe the difference between a pathway and a sidewalk is attached to the roadway infrastructure. It's part of the roadway network. So it's for non-vehicles within that roadway prism. A pathway does not have to have connectivity to a roadway. It can be independent from the roadway. No. Yes, sir. I may have already said that. We are working on that. We are working on that. It's okay. Open space. We're on to open space goals. So whenever possible. Okay, we're going to try and go on because otherwise we're not going to make it through the night. Open space goals. Whenever possible, provide for the benefit and enjoyment of the public open space and natural features. Now these include natural river frontage, green belts, river trails, pathways, creeks, floodplains, floodways, wooded areas, grasslands, foothills, and viewpoints. Identify and plan for the protection of historic sites, structures, vistas that provide connectivity to Eagle's, I know this is our favorite word, rural and agrarian heritage, while contributing to Eagle's small town feel and quality of life. So these are your broad goals on open space. This is what we've historically said. This is what open space is supposed to be doing in the flatlands of the city. We're going to have another section talk about the foothills in a minute, but that's what that is. So we're going to jump right into the next section, which is floodplain and floodway goals. And we talked about this before, which is a balance between the natural environment and recreational uses in these two areas, floodways and floodplains. So the floodway, so I was asked this, is the area that has a propensity to flood annually. It is actually it has a 1% chance of, it has a chance of flooding every year. A floodplain, which is a 100-year floodplain, has a chance of flooding 1% of the time. Now, as we know, that doesn't always work out. It's why we don't call it a 100-year floodplain anymore, because we don't really like to say that it's every 100 years it floods. It could flood more often. It may flood a lot less. So the plan today, as you're reviewing this, the floodway is the blue. The floodplain, which is the area we want to collect open space, is the green dotted area on the maps. And you can see it all the way down Dry Creek and then along the Boise River. So I'm going to have you guys look at those goals associated with open space and the floodway and floodplain goals. So you're going to be looking at pages 189 to 192. You guys good with that? Okay.
versions and everything else that have come.
Okay, we're going to go on to the next. There's lots to talk about. So we're going to shift gears from. We're going to shift gears from what we've been talking about. A lot of the policies up till now was talking about the river plain or the flat portion of the city. We're going to talk now specifically about the foothills. As I said before, the plan really was drafted with the foothills added on. And so there's separate goals for the foothills that aren't really necessarily integrated into the rest of the plan. So I'm sorry this is so small, but you have it in front of you as well. Unlike the Boise foothills, in which the majority of the foothills is in discontiguous public ownership, Eagle is over 80% private ownership in large tracts spanning miles. So I sometimes say that you can blame Boise City for the reason the Eagle foothills have taken off, because they did their plan in 99-2000, and in that plan it specifically pointed an arrow at Eagle and said, if you want to develop, go there. Because of the difference in the land ownerships. The Boise foothills plan is really a game of Tetris. They're trying to piece together and make larger tracts of public ownership and to allow for smaller tracts of developed areas within their foothills. Ours is the other way around, in which we actually have these large tracts of private ownership and very distinct and isolated tracts of public ownership. So the focus of the plan is to transition private ownership from private ownership to public ownership for protection and ensure that the long-term protection of these areas. This creates a unique category for consideration. So in the foothills, we have new categories that come up. So we have natural open space, which is land in native or wild states, ungroomed, unirrigated. Don't look at me like you wrote this language. Which includes wetlands, habitat, rare and sensitive species, scenic ridgelines, and unique geological features. Within open space, there's two subcategories, which is natural open space habitat, which is context sensitive, it focuses on protection of plant or animal species. We really try to limit human users in this area. It's separated from development and usually has very unique management plans associated with it because we're trying to protect a species or a habitat. Then we have natural open space recreation, which the emphasis is on recreational activities, and it has also scenic qualities. It has intense human uses and has high educational value and passive enforcement, which means it may be a natural open space, but you have a trail going through it. So you have the ability to see it, view the scenic benefit of it, but you're not using all of that land. But we are saying, humans, you can go through this area. We want you to transverse through this open space. Then we have what's called developed open space. This is unoccupied lands that may be altered for human use, primarily recreation and active agriculture. So I really want to be clear. We see agriculture as a developed open space. It is an active use of the land. It's not in its native form. It really has, there's money and investment and effort being put onto the land to use it for that purpose. We work through, this provides permanent preservation through the development process. So this developed open space comes into permanent through the development process, and it may include groomed or irrigated areas. So when you're talking about developed open space, sometimes it may not be irrigated, but you're more likely to see a developed piece of open space with irrigation on it. So when you're talking about parks and pathways in the foothills, that's what you're talking about. It could include sports fields, sod farms, and vineyards would be considered that. In the foothills today, as we look at the foothills today, if you drive through the foothills today, we have a really high level of potential open space. These are areas that could, because they're in private ownership, transition from private to public ownership through the development process, but they haven't today, which means there is the ability to create it, but it requires some mechanism to create that change. And what I'd like to just clarify is people are using a lot of potential open space today for what they think is a valid public purpose. It's only potential open space because that use is only by the grace of the landowner letting them on it. There is no guarantee of that use. There is no permanent protection of that use as open space. Yes?
Can we purchase easements like on established trails, like as we're developing in certain areas? Like, can you like negotiate with the landowner and say, this horse trail has been used for 30 years. Can we purchase an easement on your property through the development
keep this,
Perpetuity? Yeah, I mean, that can be done. Most likely you wouldn't purchase it through the development process, though. Most times through the development process, we would work with that landowner to transfer it to public permanent protection. The difference is potential open space, because that potential open space has no encumbrances on it today. There is no requirement for it to be preserved.
Have we ever tried to purchase, like trail easements, from private landowners, away from the development process, just as, like you were saying, you want to encourage you to go from this section to this section, and if the only way to get there is through private property, has people purchased any easements like that?
Yes, but they're generally inside the city limits. We don't purchase easements outside of our city limits.
So if some of this private property, 80% of it is privately owned now, so there's not really a lot of open space up there by that definition, because it's not public space.
There is very limited developed open space in the foothills today. You have a whole lot of potential open space in the foothills today.
So if some of that area is developed, like we were discussing Lexington Hills, it's not open space because it's Lexington Hills property, it's private, and they let other communities walk on their trails through Grace, not rural. If we did some sort of an arrangement to give public access, even though it remains in private ownership, does that become open space then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So it doesn't have to be owned by the city or
Oh, goodness, no. This does not require public ownership to be,
just public access?
it just requires public access.
One thing we've never put on there either is we talk about, public ownership, so BLM land. I don't put state land in there because that's one thing we identify, state is not publicly accessible. So we always try to tell everybody that due process. But the other one is, what is accessible public land? Right now, we have 1,600 acres, and that's the one access point. There's about another shy of 2,000 acres that's up there that is actually not accessible to the public at all. They have to go to private property. So that's another one. So there's another one we haven't put in here because for recreation purposes, just so people know that while this is still public lands, I was private property state, which means we are not required to grant public access to private lands. So technically, a lot of the private or public lands that we have up there are not publicly accessible. So that's another one.
And I think it's important when you're talking about public lands. BLM has a management plan. They have a Four Rivers management plan that actually details how they use each parcel within their ownership. Idaho Department of Lands is a little different because most of the public state lands within Eagle are actually endowment lands. The state of Idaho would sell those in a heartbeat if they could get money for their endowment purposes with that land. The problem is it's usually inaccessible land and they don't really have a developable purpose. So they hold it, but it's really not intended for public use aside from the fact that we own it as the state of Idaho. It's not being planned for, it's not being provided access to. So I think there's some differences.
About levies, we haven't talked about levies like Boise has put on, unless people talk about levies. Is this land that may go?
So we've talked about a Boise a foothills levy like Boise City has done.
One thing we put in there specifically is funding mechanism. We need funds, so,
Yep.
I want to see free, set up work issues, we have, for this levy, city of Boise does, there's a whole, needs to go in this, new plans.
Yeah, so if you go back to that page where I talked about the CEP and all of that, that has been one of the options we've talked about. The success of a foothills levy such as Boise would require a much more developed master plan for open space because you actually have to tell them what you're targeting to achieve in order to pass a levy. They're not just, otherwise it's seen as just an additional tax. And that generally is not supported by the public very well. But so that's one of the reasons for looking a little bit more closer at open space, because I think you could do an open space levy that maybe is partly the foothills. It could also be partly the river plain. You may go in and say, we want to do something along the Boise River because we want to provide permanent protection of habitat or portage access to the river. And that could be part of it as well. And I think that's one of the important parts about, as we're talking through this chapter, is really needing to kind of blur the line between the river plain and the foothills. That needs to all just be eagle as we move forward. So Charlie just threw out an acronym, RNPP process, Recreation and Public Purposes Act application. It allows for actually local government to take over ownership management of BLM property. So it actually allows for us to go in and say, we're going to use this for recreation and public purposes. There's a whole list of what they can be used for. Open space is not one of, like view sheds are not one of them. Open space is not one of them. It has to be actually developed plan for how we're going to use actively use the property. But we have an active application. So if you've heard us talk about the 1,600 acres in the foothills, the city has an application on the books with BLM, and I'd love to hear that they still think it's a valid application after all this time for that land. So it's really perfecting that plan and getting to a point that we all agree, city and BLM, this is the practice and management improvement of that land. Okay. You're going to look at pages 193 to 195 and 197 to 198. Oh, well, but before you get there, let's talk about the slug map. So the slug map was created by a series of layers when we did the Foothills plan, and Nancy and Steve probably remember it, which we put a bunch of values down and said, where do we want to see open space? And so what you have is a kind of a gradation. Low is this really light green, and it goes to a high valued piece of property. And that could be that it's habitat. It could be that it's habitat and it's view shed, and it could be all these different things. And then you look at the photos like, well, everything's green. Well, yep, you're right. So what we did in 2005 when we did this plan, is 2007 when we did this plan, is we then added this gray area, which we called the slug, because it just looks like a slug slimed over the map. And what we said is, what we're really trying to do in the foothills is connect open space. And so what the slug map did was to identify the areas that we really wanted to provide connection to. So it has points outside that are identified to like Stack Rock and things like that we want to connect our foothills to the rest of them. But within our foothills, what are the areas of high importance for open space? And so the grayed areas, this kind of sluggy patterns, are the areas that we want to be, as we're working with development, as we're working with private ownership, these are high priority areas for preservation and connectivity of open space. So a developer could come in and say, I own this whole piece right here. And we'd say, well, we really want you to focus on regional open space in these two areas of your development because they're higher value, because they do all these different functions. Doesn't say that we don't find the whole foothills to be of value. We just wanted to be able to give developers and landowners an understanding of where we would try to focus first. Does that make sense? Highway 55 is right here. This is 16. Right here. This is 16. It's really, the whole point of this map was to give people an understanding of how we could collect open space and provide connectivity. Yeah, basically. Only if everyone's sharing. It'll be online tomorrow. So go ahead. You didn't see me last week. Monday was every time. And so I got her Tuesday and I was like, I'm there. So, no, go take care of yourself, review stuff. take it with you and have something to read. I've read it. No. Pretty close. I have a video that instructs us on it as well. We did for the Foothills. Okay, we're going to go on to Foothills Trail goals. So, we're going to start on this part and we can this all kind of merges together, but create an environmentally sensitive, perpetually dedicated public trail system designed for non-motorized uses. Now, this is an interesting statement that it does say in the Foothills that we are wanting to promote non-motorized uses. So it calls out hiking, biking, and horseback riding. Charlie, it does not say anything about motorized vehicles. So, in the Foothills Trail Goals, there's two types of trails. There is a primary, two types of trailheads. There's a primary trailhead, which is a designated park area with a minimum of 8 35-foot trailer parking stalls, may include restrooms, it's dinner time. Restaurants, it's dinner time. Restrooms, water, signage, and garbage receptacles. So if you think of that trailhead, it's going to most likely have some pavement. It's really going to be a formalized trailhead. The second is secondary trailheads. Because of the size of the Foothills and because of the private ownership, there was this need to also identify secondary trailheads, and they may not have dedicated parking and will have very limited amenities and generally may be located along or parallel to a roadway, which means you could pull off. It would have a widened shoulder. You could pull off, offload, but it doesn't mean that it's a trailhead in the understanding of you're going to have everything else you want to have there. So they're different levels of service there. There's two types of trails that are identified: core trails. This is the foundation of the system, allows for multi-directional travel. So you're going to see people coming both ways on the trails. It's not like you're going to come in and back around. It's going to have connection is key to key attractions. So we had an attractors map early on when we developed this section of the plan, which was like Stack Rock. We wanted to get to Stack Rock. We wanted to get to Chaparral Road. So there was attractors, places we wanted to try and get people to. It establishes north, south, and east-west linkages. So it's really trying to create, if you think of it, as the highways of the trail system. How can you get to as many places as possible? These are unpaved and generally owned and dedicated to the city of Eagle. So if you think of that's what your core trails are. Yay, core trails. Conversely, there is a secondary set, which is a stacked loop trail, which is alignment is established through development. These are generally owned and maintained by the development with a public easement. So we're not taking over ownership and maintenance of those facilities. They're just being given public access to them. That's one of the reasons it looks a little bit, when you look at your map on 9.3, looks a little bit like a bowl of spaghetti, because we mapped everything that existed today and said that would be our starting point for where we created the stacked loop system versus the core system. So we kind of chose to overmap and then be able to go back in through the development process and formalize those loops. The bike park. No. Right there. Okay. If you'd like to say you'd like it visible, yes, you can. Okay, so I'm going to have you guys look at pages 196 to 197. This is the end of the trails portion of the plan, the parks, trails, and open space section. So I'm going to go back to your guiding questions. Which does the plan identify the types, parks, trails, and open space? I see you, hang on, that the city should be focusing on. Are existing level of services adequate? And are there items, ideas, or concepts that we're missing within this chapter?
Way back when this was done, electric bicycle wasn't that powerful.
We have an ordinance on that.
Okay, you said non-motorized. Technically.
We have an ordinance on that.
How's that different to you?
It allows it.
So we actually wrote e-bike ordinance specifically allowing for type 1 bikes on all e-purpose trails.
So type 1 is considered non-motorized for this.
Well, it depends on which agency. Forest Service still calls it motorized. Department of Interior still says it's motorized. However, Ada County on their trails, and the City of Eagle, and then Avalon Trails, they allow type 1, which is LSS only, so no problem.
That can be a discussion, and you can add that to a comment in your list about how do we manage that. What? Jeep trails. You can add that to your wants. You can put that under themes that are missing.
So I
Okay, I feel like we have probably beat this one to death. So we're going to move on to what? We're going to move on to the last chapter of the plan. So I know you're all excited. You've been waiting 5 months to get to this point, which is implementation. So the implementation chapter of the comp plan is fairly new as it exists today. We really rethought it in 2017, and it included that very long 4 pages of tables of things that we were going to try and do from this plan. That table was really created to kind of put everything in the rest of the plan into one list and said, this is what we're going to try and do. It hasn't necessarily been the most successful, but we'll talk about that as we go forward. So implementation really talks about how does this plan work with the larger development process, how and when is it amended, and then the council control of prioritization and projects. So that's really the 3 big pieces of implementation chapter. So how does this plan work with the larger development process? So a comprehensive plan under Idaho Code 6765 is a guide. It is not law, it is not ordinance. We use it as a measuring tool to say, does a development or does anything type of action, land use action of the city, in general meet this or conform to this plan? Now, if it doesn't conform to the plan, that doesn't mean we just don't do it. Sometimes we look at that and we say, wow, there's been some extenuating circumstances and the plan just is no longer relevant here. And we can then talk through that. But in every land use application you see within the city, you will see a section that says compliance with the comprehensive plan. And it's a major finding that needs to happen at the very onset of most development applications. And it can be, yes, it complies, or no, it doesn't, and here's why it doesn't. And then it's left to our council to determine, are the circumstances of noncompliance significant enough to stop the development moving forward, or were there extenuating circumstances to be applied? It happens in every staff report has a section on compliance to the comprehensive plan. So it is actually a written finding that's required in the development actions. Goes to P&Z, and there's compliance with the comp plan in design review. So it's in almost all of our actions, is it just discussed. So the entitlement tools we use, so this is where your comp plan kind of gets measured out, is we use Eagle City Code. It has several references to the city's comprehensive plan and compliance. We use clustering and transitional uses within that code to help guide the development in accordance with the plan. We use development agreements, which are actually a contract between the city and a landowner for specific uses. When we get into the development agreement process, it is allowed for us to provide some additional, what we would call negotiations with a landowner. It allows for us to actually contractually bind them to their approval versus several approvals where you could just be like, yes or no, go forward. This actually is where we can build in conditions and actually require additional improvements for the city. And that's why the city, you'll see most applications within the city use a development agreement as their enforcement tool. Development agreements can be attached at the time of rezone. So usually you're seeing it at time of annexation or rezone of a property associated with a development. And then finally, a planned unit development. Under Eagle City Code, a planned unit development is required for any development of 10 lots or more within the city. We actually require them to go there. The purpose is to create a livable community that provides exemplary open space, recreation, and encourages a diversification of housing types, styles, and living options. The reason that purpose statement is so important is because the PUD actually allows for alternative lot sizing with increasing offset of open space, which basically means you can create lots that are smaller than what an underlying zone would require. But what you do is you take the square footage. If my lot was supposed to be 10,000 and I made it 5,000, you increase your open space by 5,000 square feet. So you're not getting more units, you're just getting a trade-off of unit size to a percentage of open space. It does increase the minimum open space. It increases from 18% in a standard subdivision to a 20% minimum in a PUD. Inclusion of commercial uses, you can have up to 10% of the site can be non-principally permitted uses. So when we look at our land use table, there's often things that are like you can have enclosed storage, you can have outdoor storage, but not enclosed storage. And somebody could come and say, I want to do 10% of my site as enclosed storage. They would be able to bring that up, even though it wasn't permitted within that designation or zone. And then it allows for something called, so politically correct, housing for older persons, which is actually increased density and lot line allowances for housing for people of 60 years or older within the city. So the reason the plan unit developments are important is a lot of the policy theming and concepts in the comprehensive plan can be better realized through the use of a PUD. Because the PUD gives you those tools, those flexibilities that may allow you to look a little bit closer at a development and say, I need to provide better buffering in this area. Can I get lower lot sizes to increase my open space in that area? Can I look at specific uses that may be challenging to develop if you weren't given other allowances? So the PUD is a really important implementation tool to the city's comprehensive plan because it gives that flexibility and negotiation of design elements.
So builder comes in and they have elevations of their homes, and you see what these homes are gonna look like. Nice concept, but you're not gonna go build those homes off of that. You're gonna use blueprints that do all the details. This comp plan is like that concept design.
Yep.
That you can vary from without penalty. But if they're varying from zoning, that's when they need to come in for zoning waivers and rezoning approval.
Correct.
And all that. And so this isn't rigid.
The comp plan's the lookbook. It's what we want us to look like. It's the themes and pretty pictures of what we want our community to look like. We then use these tools to create the actual community that's in place.
And so in this implementation table of 4 or 5 pages,
Yes.
if that needs to be changed for some reason, does that have to go through a whole comp plan amendment? Or would it be better for that table to exist elsewhere?
Well, let me explain that to you. So the first question is, are there additional tools or concepts the city should be considering when we're talking about how we implement our plans? So are there things that you want to see the city doing more? Farmland preservation, is there a purchase of development rights? Are those things that you want the city to pursue further, but they're not just necessarily in our implementation tools today? Is there additional things you want us to consider doing? So then, I'm going to get to you, but you're going to have to wait a second, because I want to go linearly through the plan. So the second portion of this chapter deals with amendments. So the plan is a guide, and so we recognize a guide has to be amended from time to time. What we felt was really important pre-recession is different post-recession, right? So we know those things have to happen. The goal is to review the plan as a city every 10 years, regardless. So every 10 years, our plan is getting pulled off the shelf. We're going through a big process like this and having this conversation. Sometimes it happens more frequently, but that's the minimum, right? We have 2 ways of amending the plan. So you have an applicant initiated. It should be initiated. Code Idaho, an applicant initiated amendment, which is Idaho code requires the city to allow for an outside entity to request an amendment to the plan. We don't get to hold our plan and say, and so is the word of God. So is the word of Nicole. No, it doesn't work that way. We actually have to, so we have to provide a process that can be done. Under Idaho code, we can limit it to twice a year. So we can say we will only amend our plan twice a year, and people have to work through that. But we do have to say, if you're going to make a request, here's what the request needs to include. And so in that section of the plan, if you look under 11.3.1, there's a list of things that an applicant needs to tell us when they come to amend the plan. They need to tell us why, what's it going to happen, how many people is it going to affect. They're going to have to do all of that. The second type of amendment is a city-initiated plan amendment, and that details the rationale and reasons why the city would consider amending the plan? Why would we amend the plan? And usually it includes, hey, ACHD has changed their policy on roads and everything needs to have a median now. Well, that changes how we calculate open space. That changes how we design roadways. Our right-of-way widths need to get way wider to allow for it. I don't expect that, but we could talk about it. So an agency changing how they do it, a partner agency, would affect how we manage our plan. So we would want to amend it for that. The recession would have been a good reason for us to go back and look at our plan. Certain things have happened. Species designations could be a good reason for us to amend our plan. We now have the banana slug that migrated from California to Idaho, and now we have a protected area that we need to protect the banana slug. Those type of things are in there for why the city would initiate a change to our comprehensive plan. So in that section, I would like you to look at 11.3 and 11.3.1 and 11.3.2 and say, are there other factors or questions the city should be consider before amending the plan? And I was typing too fast today if you can't tell. Finally, this is the bulk of the implementation section, the council prioritization and implementation. So this section was established in 2017 to ensure cross-department implementation of the plan. As you've seen, this plan does not just address land use. So it's not just planning and zoning administration dealing with it. It touches parks and pathways. It touches economic development. It touches a lot of things. But the plan was being drafted and had policies and priorities and goals that were not necessarily being communicated across all the departments, or were great in communicating when they were being adopted, but were never being followed through on over the years. So in 2017, we created this matrix of policies that established what was to be done, where did it come from in the plan, and who was going to handle doing that work, and how that work got done. Now, we recognize that in a given budget year, the council decides what we spend our money on and what we all spend our time on, but it gives them a place to go to one place and kind of see the list of things to get done. Items fall into several categories, and I wanted to kind of talk about that because I think while we created this implementation section in 2017, it may have been a little bit more robust than what we were going to get done. So 60% of the projects identified in that matrix are ongoing monitoring. So these are things that we are ongoing, we're doing them annually. It's not necessarily getting reported out, but they're things that we're doing as staff. Less than 1% is completed projects. So of those things that said, go and do this, we've completed less than 1% of those. We have 28% of the projects are incomplete or future projects, and then 1% are irrelevant projects. And that's because either something's changed, the city's no longer doing something, and while we drafted the plan in 2017, it's no longer relevant to what we do today. So this process was originally envisioned, Mr. Bender, to be prioritized by each council. They was adopted by a separate resolution from the comprehensive plan and was added into the comprehensive plan as a prioritization process from the council. So this laundry list goes through a secondary prioritization process in which the council then said, we want you to work on these things in this order. It doesn't require an amendment to the plan because that plan's not prioritized. Only the resolution and prioritization that comes out of the council through a separate resolution is prioritized. One of the things that's happened is in the city in the last 3 years has begun developing a capital improvement plan and a capital maintenance plan. Many of these items are in those planning documents in different ways. And so as we move forward, whether this implementation section is actually the best way to do it, or whether it's an extension of our capital maintenance and capital improvement plan that's then reviewed and prioritized annually by the council, is kind of a question of what we need to think about. So what should this section focus on? Ongoing projects, discrete projects that move us towards implementation, or monitoring actions, which is 60% of what's on here, right? It's the monitoring actions. What is the timeline for implementation? Should we be looking in making a more discrete list that's maybe a 5-year or a 10-year list versus a very long, exhaustive list of everything in the plan? How do we ensure implementation? That's one of the things we know is the list is prioritized by council. How do we make sure departments are cross-departmentally still prioritizing these tasks? And should the plan recognize the capital planning process to this, of the city? Cool. With that, talk about implementation.
We're done, we're in progress.
Okay. I think all the groups have kind of gotten through that portion of this. Are you guys all comfortable? I just met my goal, by the way. Okay, so I get a lot of standing during these days. So want to go forward as we go forward into the next step. So we have met 5 times. We have one more meeting. Hold with me, people. Hold with me. And I want to just talk a little bit about the final recommendation and how we're going to move forward with that. So as we end the process, the final recommendation will be based on a consensus of the whole. I want to be clear about that. I've been sending out to you guys kind of a summary of all the comments, what we've been hearing. This isn't a place for you to put your own individual, like, I didn't get this in there and I want this in there. The goal of having table groups was to get consensus statements. Where are we moving forward together? So what are the committee's main concerns? So as we go forward, you're going to be getting a summary sheet from me this next week. We will be meeting on June 13th to formalize the final recommendation. So I'm going to finish with this. All your guys' notes are going to go down onto the summary sheet. I'm going to do some work on trying to consolidate common themes within that sheet. And I'm going to send it back out to you. And what I would like you guys to do is in the next week and a half, 2 weeks, to really look at the list and tell me what are the committee's main concerns and recommendations. Are they on there? Did we get to a place of consensus when we were talking? I can say one thing I know for sure. Hey, do you guys think the plan's a little redundant? I think everybody here will say the plan is redundant. Get rid of redundancies. Relevant and substantive issues need to be universally agreed on. We aren't going to go and say, somebody says, I've decided Eagle should be a Space Force community and we're going to put rockets in the community. Well, that's a one-off opinion. That's not something that's going to be built on collaboration and consensus. I want you to remember as we go forward that each of you as community members will get to continue engage in the public process. This is a very tip, if you remember, the very tip of the iceberg of this process. There is a lot more process to go through. So as we go through the process, just remember, if it's not your personal opinion, we're probably okay. If it is your personal opinion, engage in the process. Come to the meetings. Provide testimony. I'm not going to stop you from doing that. A couple of questions I want you to ask yourself as you move forward is, how should the city amend the plan? I've heard a lot of opinions about this, and I would like the committee to kind of have a larger conversation and recommendation of the council. Is this an internal or an external amendment? That meaning, is staff doing the recommendations? Are you feeling that there's sections that you want specifically consultants to look at? The last time we did this, it was a hybrid. We hired consultants for a couple of the sections because they were challenging and we didn't have expertise. And some of them were written internally. We did all of our own public participation for the plan. So are those things that you want to consider as we move forward and you want the council to consider how they do this process? Are there sections of the plan that need updating but do not require a complete redrafting? So we've talked through this plan. There's places that we know there's updates. There's just data that needs to just be updated, but it maybe isn't a full rewrite of the plan. And we'll be talking about this as we go forward in sections. So we'll be talking about chapter by chapter. This is a chapter that we felt like it had, generally the theming's correct. It just needs data updates, those type of things. And what is the timeline or urgency of the amendment? Are there certain sections that are more important than others? It's ideal to say we would like 4 years to redraft the city's comp plan, but I guarantee you by the end of the 4th year, what we did in the first year will no longer be relevant. So let's keep in mind, timing and how we do this. So are there areas that we would triage? These things are really important. These things need to be addressed early on and consistently. Here are things that we don't need to. And Charlie left, so his statement is always pay more, go quickly, pay less, go more slowly. So bear that in mind too as the city moves forward. What is the desire? Do you want a plan that's done quickly that maybe is a lot of outsourcing, or do you want to see it go more slowly, be insourced? Historically, the City of Eagles wanted to own their plan. We don't do a lot of outsourcing of our planning because we want it to be from the people. So we spend a lot of time in community meetings. We do a lot of public outreach. We do a lot of survey work to get our comp plan written. Does it mean that it always has to be that way? No. But these are the things I think our council is looking for some direction on, of how you want to see this plan move forward to create the next real good guide for the City of Eagle, at least for the next 10-year horizon.
In this room, we have a lot of our professionals that are sitting around our other entities, our sewer, our ACHD, and ITD, some of these other entities that are professionals. I would say Robin is a professional in economic development. So they've been sitting here with us listening to these whole things. Would they be a part of, evaluate that before it goes back to amendment resource?
Yeah, that's a good question. So historically, what we do with this comp plan review committee is just doing that, theming big pieces like this is things that are out of date. The council had their list of projects that they wanted, things they wanted considered, but we want to go out to the public and say, maybe we need to broaden this space a little bit more. Maybe there's more there than what we are seeing. The next part is we actually have a comprehensive plan rewrite committee that works, and it includes all of the agencies. Tom probably will get to come and play some more, and Robin and Neil will be there, and we'll bring all of those entities back into play and have fun, because it's such a fun time, I know. And we'll actually be working with them and engaging with them. We'll consult when we talk about sewer. I'll sit down with Neil and we'll just have a conversation about sewer. We've already actually had one of those just this last week. So we'll be spending time with them, and that's being a part of a partner agency. They'll be there. We'll ask for their comment. This plan, once it is drafted, still goes out to transmitted to all of our entities for comment. So they have the ability to come back and say, we are concerned about these policies or these aren't implementable. I'm hoping that if I've done my job right, we don't have a lot of those comments because they've been part and partial at sitting at the table writing those policies out. So yeah, our goal is not to, this isn't a one and done. This is really just the beginning of kind of cultivating this conversation forward. Okay?
We gave ourselves with this committee a hard deadline.
Yes. No, the council gave you a hard deadline.
We were given. Do we expect hard deadlines throughout the rest of the process?
There will be.
I will not be But whatever we do at the end, I work proposals for defense contractors. The first half takes the first 90% of the time, and the second half takes the second 90%. Except if you have yourself a deadline and you keep trying to fix it, we have got to make sure that the back end has got a review period on it that's long enough that we can clean this up. This current plan is chock full of, we went too fast at the end and didn't clean it up. And I just want to make sure that going forward, as we get to the later stages, we keep that.
So what's going to happen, let's just talk a little bit. You're going to make a recommendation to the council. The council's then going to take your recommendation, they're going to review it, and they're going to guide me and say, Nicole, here's what we want to see get done. I will then take that information and draft a scope of work for our council. And I will say, here's what the project looks like. Based on current, ready, Mayor? Project capacity, this is what we can get done, and this is what we can't get done. This is a realistic timeline. This is not a realistic timeline. They'll get that. It'll also include consulting resources that we need and an overall budget for the project. We will then sit down with the council and ask the council to adopt that scope of work. Now, it'll have a deadline on it. It'll have a completion time. Does it mean it's always going to complete on time? No. Yeah, no. Whoever said no, amen, sister. It will do our best. But, you know, things happen. Times, we work through it, and that's the whole point. But we, you know, first things first, last things never. Our goal is to give them a complete scope of work using this information and their opinions about what they feel need to go forward and have a realistic timeline for implementation. Now, if the council says, no, Nicole, I want it done in 6 months, again, pay more, go quickly, will probably become a little bit more of a conversation. Of course, our council could come back and say, we want to amend chapter 2, 4, and 16, and that's it. And then that's 16 will be difficult. But that's their prerogative as the council. Again, we all serve at their leisure and at their request. And so that's where that comes from. Is that fair? So, next meeting, June 13th. You're all excited. I know you are. I'm excited. I'm going to send to you in the next week or so the last of the summary pages. You'll have these guiding questions as you review it. The final meeting will be June 13th. We'll review and the recommendation and formalize that, and it will go to the council. At this point in time, it will probably go to the council, and I'm going to tell you this. It will most likely be June 23rd, which will be a 3 o'clock meeting to the council. And that is because I am out of town on the 28th. So I've got to go to 4-H Nationals. So any questions? Okay. Thank you all. I cannot express my appreciation for all of you and your work and your time together. You know, every time I do this process with Eagle, this is not my first rodeo at Eagle. I just am so lucky by the citizens and the participants we have in our process. So thank you so much. You know, it was a little while, but it's good. It did. Thank you, ma'am.